there was just the tiniest of slits between my face mask and my goggles. And at the end of the day, it looked like someone had taken a fine black marker, a Sharpie, and drawn a black line. But it was just a thin strip of frostbite. That piece of skin had frozen.
The South Pole. Who in their right mind wants to cross the South Pole? Why would anybody want to cross Antarctica and go to the South Pole? Talk to me about how did you even get started thinking about that idea?
Yeah, look, I have no idea as an African how one would go down that rabbit hole, because when you watch any of the programs, the documentaries, the famous films, the pictures always convey these crazy Scandinavians or mad Scotsmen and Englishmen at the absolute end of their tether. There ain't never pictures of Africans in any of those stories,
No.
So you need to be growing up in a part of the world where the weather's just dismal to have any sense of what Antarctica is going to be like. And of course, I grew up in Johannesburg, where we brag about 360 days of good weather, and if there's 5 days of grey skies, we all get grumpy. You know?
That's right.
But I link it back to that spirit of curiosity. You know, the Lord just made me more curious than most for some reason, and maybe my folks helped facilitate the path of curiosity by encouraging this idea that you can do anything you want with your life. You can, be anyone you want to be.
You can dream it, you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you're a kid, I mean, I wanted to be an astronaut and a pilot, and then I got into mountain climbing. Johannesburg never really gets that cold, certainly not like the sort of polar areas. But something about those tales, something about reading Scott's final journey and his handwritten diary right to the very last words that he made. There's something about that just, it would just fill me with these part terrifying, but part, wow, could I be in similar situations and make a better decision or hold on a bit longer? Because I suspected that I had a real persevering gene and a lot of grit from all of this other crazy stuff.
At the end of the day, it's that ability to persevere that's been your strongest suit, right? So you've been able to apply that across many disciplines, right? Yeah, and so I mean, and I want to talk a little bit about that, how that really works.
Yes.
Because and I've had the fun, the privilege to climb with you on some. For me, were epic. For you, were normal stuff. But you have that amazing ability to compartmentalize pain, fatigue, and to continue forward. Let's get to that in a few minutes.
Okay.
Let's talk about this whole idea of following in Scott's footsteps, and that's been a theme too. You find these explorers and say, "I'd like to do what they did."
Yeah. Again, I mean, there's a bunch of different threads going on in kind of my psyche and my spirit. Obviously, before I knew the Lord, those things were still there because that's how God made me. Mm-hmm. And so really the journey of discovering kind of whose image I've made starts to qualify that stuff. But it was always there. And I have always been obsessed around potential, around possibility. And so if my life has been discovering that, hey, I might actually be a pretty good endurance athlete, I wonder what I can do. How's God made me, And I love going to places, but there is something about the challenge. There's something about, obviously mountains, it's a very intuitive challenge. You want to climb to the top of the mountain. Like, no one goes to Everest because they want to get to Camp 3.
That's right.
They want to get to the top of the mountain.
That's right.
And so there's something about the intuitive, the end, like the indicator that you've, in a very simplistic way, have failed or succeeded. That's it. And when the challenges are stuff like Antarctica and the desert, they become a little bit more complex, but there is still the end, the tippy top of this thing for the South Pole. It's like you're there, there's a pole. You stand there, and every direction you face is north, which is overwhelming to your tired mind after trying 65 days to walk due south. So it came in a season when I hadn't started a family yet, and so there was extra grace, and I was involved with my partner at the time in this crazy project called Team Extreme, and we were sponsored by a South African gold mining company. And at the time, they were one of the leading gold producers, and they were going on a whole new sort of adventure, trying to cut costs. And they brought us on to demonstrate like a cross-cultural walk. My partner was a black guy at the time. So the first
we can't say African-American because he wasn't American.
No. He was born in Nelspruit, about 3 hours outside of Johannesburg. Dear friend of mine, Sisu Vilani. He became the first black guy to climb Everest on this journey. And so we were on a contract with this gold mine to just kind of do a few things. One was demonstrate the ability to work together with vastly different cultures, which is problematic historically in South Africa, in every industry, but gold mining, particularly the mining industry. They've had cross-cultural challenges since its inception. Right. And then to take and facilitate team builds up Kilimanjaro and to go and do crazy stuff ourselves. And so after Everest, it was always on the horizon to maybe go to Antarctica. I remember as part of the 7, you climb Vinson, which is the highest in Antarctica. So I had been down there and I had seen the magic that is Antarctica on its good day, which is like one day in 90,
Yeah.
And that's the day you typically land and the day you leave, because it's the only day that planes can fly. So you have a very misguided idea of actually what it's like. But there is something very special about the place. The air is super clear. The mountains stand like they were lost in an early period of our time, made for no particular individual, but put there nonetheless by a very specific God with a specific plan. So they just fill you with mystery. And so after Everest, the kind of plan that was the 7 summits culminating in Everest. There were a couple of other mountains in that plan, potentially K2, the second highest mountain in the world. But the next immediate goal was to try and be the first Africans to walk to Antarctica, to the South Pole, and to do that unsupported, And I had spent time down there climbing Vinson, the highest mountain, also learning how to do some skiing, because, hey, we'd never skied, and guess what? You're skiing to the South Pole, and trying to get a sense of how far could we ski in a day, carrying the kind of weight we would need to if we wanted to do it unsupported. And was it something we could potentially do with no skiing experience? Could we learn sufficient? Because we could do it so there's a couple of, I say commercial, but one is called The Last Degree. So you can pay a company to fly you out to 88 degrees south and walk 60 nautical miles. In other words, the last degree, and arrive at the South Pole in the company of a guide. It takes about a week. You're above the polar plateau, so you don't have the wind, but you have the really cold -40, and you get to experience the South Pole. And that's relatively, it's popular.
I like that idea. That's doable for
100%.
A lot of people.
And you can say you walk to the South Pole, and no one's the wiser.
That's right.
They'll put you instantly in the category of Scott without digging too deep. And if you change the conversation, that's where it'll be left.
That's right.
And we could also do it supported, where we choose a line that's going to be 600 miles long, and we start outside 80 degrees, which is kind of the criteria to be able to qualify as having walked to the South Pole in terms of an endurance feat, just outside 80 degrees. So you've walked 10 degrees of latitude, 600 nautical miles. And obviously people laying supplies would make that significantly easier. And so having been down to Vinson a couple of times and spent some time skiing, I got to a place where I thought, you know what, I think we can actually do this, but it's going to take us longer than some of the FOSS Scandinavians. Now, here's this crazy thing. It's kind of like oxygen. Remember, we spoke about oxygen in the death zone. If you're fit and strong, you can turn up the oxygen and get more of it. And so you suddenly, because you don't need it to last as long,
Right.
so you suddenly feel stronger, which means you can climb faster, which means you need less, which means you can turn it up. But if you're slow, you've got to turn that down. You need it to last longer. You're getting less. You're getting fatigued quicker. You're going to take longer. And so it works in your favor or against your favor.
Yeah.
It's similar in the South Pole. The fact that we never skied meant we can't ski as fast. Because we can't ski as fast means it's going to take us longer to get to the South Pole. That means we're going to have to carry more food, which
Yeah.
means we're carrying a heavier
weight.
sled, which means it's going to
Take
make
longer.
us even longer.
Yeah.
And it's, guys, fast guys do it in around 40 days. We were talking 60 days, so it's like a factor of 50% more time, more food, all of that kind of stuff. But I believed we could do it. And so we began training, pulling tires up and down our neighborhood. And that really was the idea, to try and walk, because we figured we could do about 20 kilometers a day and do it for 60 days, roughly 1,200 kilometers, 600 miles on limited rations, and make it to the South Pole with a week of emergency rations where you can sit around a pared down ration, but you can sit around in a tent and wait for bad weather or wind to stop. And that then became kind of the planning, sort of the point we moved back and worked towards. Can we pull a tire around the neighborhood for 6 hours and cover a certain distance, which translated to another distance on the ice? And that's how the journey kind of started physically for us.
Wow. And so when did you start training in how long did you train before 3 months?
No, so we started about 6 specific months before.
I see.
And the reason is our mountain expeditions, which we were doing all the time, we were taking up executives from that gold mining company up Kilimanjaro. That kept us reasonably aerobically fit. But when you're pulling a sled, you're using a very specific set of muscles. And to do that 10 hours a day for 60 days requires very specific conditioning. And we spent about 6 months pulling tires around the neighborhood. And I must tell you, it's an unusual thing seeing a black and a white guy pull tires up and down the roads in Johannesburg. Ain't no one done it before or since. If you saw anyone, it was us.
Yeah.
And we had to find a quiet place where the security companies wouldn't harass us, because boy, when you tell them you're training for the South Pole, you just get big eyes, And that's what was required for the physical adaptation in terms of getting that right. And then we also started adapting our bodies to drinking olive oil. Now, historically, guys who've done similar endeavors, the challenge is the cold requires an extra amount of available energy just to metabolize, to keep your thermal regulation enough, regardless of your energy output. And so a sedentary male on an average day will spend about 2,000 calories of energy just keeping alive.
Lay on the couch.
Laying on the couch, go to work, do your emails, just your respiratory, your digestive, all of that stuff's going to burn about 2,000 calories. We were going to burn about 4 times that. And so you can't carry that amount of food because of the fact that you're doing it unsupported, and you would need to carry too much. Yeah. So there's a deficit, and that deficit is made up partly by consuming one of 2 things historically: ghee butter, which is that really fatty butter that the Indians love cooking their curries with, or olive oil. Now, we couldn't really access ghee butter, and we weren't sure what the equivalent would be in South America before we flew out to Antarctica. So we just started with olive oil, and our daily number was about 100 mils. I don't know what that is in ounces. But, I mean, that's about 50 mils maybe. It's like kind of double that, It's these little plastic bottles. Yeah. But there's no ways you can just drink 100 mils of olive oil, because you're going to be running to the bathroom.
Right.
So we had to adapt to that. And it's interesting that, again, in consulting, I was studying sports psychology at the University of Johannesburg at the time. So I had a real close relationship with the human movement science guys. That was one of my major. And they said, look, they don't think you're going to be able to metabolize that amount of oil. They think it's going to pass, you know. And I can tell you categorically, there were a handful of days when I could not drink my little bottle of olive oil. It was just so wretched. And the next day, I hit the wall. I became hyperglycemic. So dependent had my body become on 824 kilocalories of energy. So we had 100 mils each, so 6 liters. So we had 100 mils a day over 60 days. So we each drank 6 liters of olive oil. And we started about 2 months before the time with a tablespoon. And we upped it until the kind of last week, it was a sort of a small wine glass, half a wine glass of olive oil. That was horrendous. Horrendous.
Yes.
The worst thing ever.
Yeah. I can't imagine.
And let me tell you, those little plastic bottles froze.
Yeah.
Because we were walking in a fridge the whole day.
Right.
So we would get to the evening and Sibu would be on dinner duty and he'd be pulling out these frozen bottles of olive oil, and now you'd have to put them in some hot water to thaw it out. And one of two things inevitably happened. You left it for too short a time and it didn't properly thaw. So as you took that bottle, you would drink 2/3 of it would be lukewarm oil, and then the sloppy little sludgy icy thing that you'd have to suck through the bottle top and glug back down and try and do it before you threw everything up, you know. Or he left it too long in the boiling water and it felt like motor oil at the Indy 500 going down your throat, and it would burn and it would just be horrendous. So no matter how you did, I mean, I had about...
But this was a supplement. This was...
energy, just energy,
right.
Calories.
So it was not the food you took.
Not the food. We had then in addition, so breakfast typically started out with a little boil in the bag oats, that I think was around 400 calories. We had a coffee or a tea to start. Then we would walk, and the walk would have 4 bags of each 400 calories. Those bags were nuts and M&Ms, pieces of salami cut up, energy bars. We then had a Stanley flask with an energy drink, but it was mostly around sort of electrolytes and stuff like that, you know. And then evening we would start with a cup of soup and another boil in the bag meal, like a chicken or a mince that also was around 400 calories, and a dessert, also a boil in the bag, and we'd end with like a hot chocolate. And that was it. And then our thing of olive oil. And so we were always at a deficit, and the deficit would then be cannibalized from your muscle and your fat. I had about 3 steps that I needed to drink the olive oil that I didn't retch it all up. Sibu had about 15. He had such an elaborate scheme that he would film on occasion, because it really was like a story, or he could not get that stuff down. And, you know, I said that there were 2 or 3 occasions when no matter what I did that particular evening, I just could not get that bottle of olive. I mean, the minute I put it under my nose and I caught a sniff of olive oil, I would, and I couldn't. And then I paid the price the next day, you know.
Wow. So typically you have that meal. Would you take your olive oil before the meal, during the meal, after the meal?
It would be before. And then we would shovel stuff down quickly and just try and smother
keep it down.
I mean, it was just, and then we would always do video diaries. And inevitably what happened, and the video diaries would be after dinner, you know, where you're talking and all of a sudden there's a recurrence of oil. And you're like, hang on a second. Get yourself together and then push pause. Okay, I can carry on talking now. Yeah, no, it was just horrendous. And it's so interesting because I love cooking with olive oil, and I can cook a good tomato or pasta sauce, and I'll sprinkle a bit on the on a salad. But the thought of pouring it into a glass, you know, or in a little plastic bottle, like, can get me going again. And it's been 20 years almost, you know. It's been a long time.
Well, now that you've done that, is there another alternative? Is there something else out there nowadays?
No.
Nothing.
You know, the caloric food has, the whole science has been away from calories. Everything is low calories, low calories, low calories, you know. And so there are, there are a few niche kind of what they call meals, the MRE's meals ready to eat, the pre-packed stuff that has higher calories for the hills, for mountain expeditions. You know, you've experienced a few of them on our trips, no doubt. But they don't have super calories. Like, you know, there isn't really an idea of a super calorie.
No.
Excuse me, our ultra endurance events, we often make, and our riders make homemade stuff where they combine peanut butter, you know, almonds, nutty things, real fatty things with high calorie quantities, some oats, but it's just, you're going to still have to grind it out today if you're doing it unsupported. The other thing is that we took 65 days, so we're about as slow as anyone's ever walked to the South Pole, because we effectively learned how to ski. You know, our first degree, well, we got stuck in a windstorm for 6 days, but our first degree took about 8 days if you minus that. But by the time we got to the South Pole, we were covering a degree, 60 miles, in about 5 days. So we'd become significant. Yes, our sleds were becoming lighter, but you just become more efficient. Your routines, the redundancy, everything you do becomes way more efficient. And you have to be efficient because the cold just kills you in seconds. You don't have, I mean, I can share one story. We had very specific roles that covered stuff like routine for taking down and putting up our tents and our tent. One of my roles in the morning was to unknot the solar panel, ran down the full length of the outside of the tent. And it was one of those elastic bungee cords that we had tied it. But I had learned that when I take my gloved hand out of my mitts, so I've still got a glove on my hand. When it's around minus 40, minus 50, I've only got about 7 seconds of dexterity to manipulate a knot to get that knot undone. 7 seconds. And I would count. And by the time I got to 4 or 5 seconds, if I was realizing I'm messing this up, I'd have to leave it and put my gloves back in my mitts and do something else, get the warmth back again, and go and try it again, because that's how quick you would get frostbite. You know? I mean, it was just crazy, crazy cold. You know what people don't realize about the cold is we tend to speak about degrees of cold as a descriptive continuum. Oh, it's cold. Oh, it's really cold. It's freezing. It's chilly. But it's warm. It's hot. But real cold has to do with thermal energy and how quickly it moves across the thermal gradient. And the bigger the gap between the absolute high and the absolute low of a point of contact, the quicker the energy moves across that gap. So if you're touching something and your body temperature is 37 degrees, but certainly not your fingers. Let's say you're 25 degrees centigrade, the temperature on your finger, and you're touching a metal spoon that's minus 30, the thermal gradient is almost 50 degrees. So the energy transfers almost instantaneously across the medium. And it's the speed of transfer that causes damage, like frostbite, you know, and cellular damage.
I'd never heard that before. There's real physics in that, isn't it?
It's totally physics. It has nothing to do with our description, you know. And so you've just got energy that's moving from one medium to another, thermal energy. And if it's doing it very quickly, it's going to destroy
the cells.
The cells, you know. That's why when you take a glass of boiling water and you throw it into the air, it explodes into crystals and powder. It's a crazy thing. So the whole dynamic down there was around just protecting our thermal energy, being aware, you know, if you get up in the morning and you're going to go for a number 2, when you're in crouch position and you get your pants down, you've got 10 seconds to get your pants back up, or you're in age-restricted kind of trouble. And you count down those 10 seconds. No. So eventually it's, you know, you stop going. Because it's just such a horrendous thing to do. One day early on, I stopped en route to take a pee, and I turned my back. So we were walking into the wind the whole time because we're walking to the South Pole and we're climbing up the polar plateau. It's hardly ever noticeably uphill, but you feel, 1, the weight of your sled, and 2, this headwind as those katabatic winds accelerate down that gradient. So we were always into the wind. So early on, and it's always around minus 40. You know, we had much colder days with the wind chill, but within a week or two, that was pretty standard, minus 40. So I stopped to take a pee, and I turn my back, obviously. I take my mitts off, so now I've got gloves on again, and I make the mistake of putting my mitts under my arms with the open end into the wind.
Facing the wind, yeah.
I take 10, 15 seconds to take a pee, and I'm done. And I put my hands back in there, and it's like putting them into 2 fridges, and I realized what I'd done. I'd lost all that thermal energy. I had painful hands for about 3 hours, is how long it took me to generate enough thermal energy that I had a surplus to start warming up my mitts again. 3 hours of pain because I'd made a 15-second mistake.
Wow.
But you make that mistake once.
Yeah.
You don't do it again, you know.
Yeah.
You learn. And look, if you're Scandinavian and you go and walk in the dog and it's minus 50, you know that when you're 5.
That's right.
You don't know that when you're 5 when you in Johannesburg,
That's right.
you know.
Yeah.
So we were inventing a lot of time the wheel and just figuring out. And thus, when you're conservative and you're limited, it means you're there for longer. You got to be a little bit more, I guess, circumspect around your timeline and how aggressive you can be.
What was the terrain like? What does it look like on the? You almost have this. It's like instead of Mars being red, it's Mars being white. You know.
Yes.
What's it like? I mean, when everything's there's like no landmarks, right? I mean, it's just white plain.
It was by a long way the most mentally fatiguing, debilitating, and monotonous thing I've ever done. You know, we joked, but there was truth in it, that if by some strange twist of fate we found a gun lying in the snow, we would have used it on ourselves. You know, and just ended the misery.
Yeah.
So we only passed mountains right at the start, the Patriot Hills, when you pass camp 3-4 days after leaving kind of the coastline. And then near halfway, you see the Thiel Mountains in the distance. But and you see them for maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and then the Thiel Mountains are gone. Then you don't see anything. It's just flat,
Plateau.
and ice. And then you go through sastrugi, which are these ice formations that the wind has sculpted over time. And most of the time, the sastrugi is quite short. We went through a day or two where the sastrugi was as high as this bookshelf cabinet.
Wow.
And you now run the risk of twisting an ankle or breaking a leg if you're not careful, because you're trying to navigate through all of it. But most of the time, the sastrugi was relatively low. But the ice, like flakes of that sastrugi, would break off in the wind. And many times I was convinced I saw a white butterfly.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for it, and I realize it's a piece of sastrugi that's broken off, and, you know, like just desperate to see something that's not white and not flat, because it was. And then for 9 days, we caught that front quite early on, in about the second and third week, where it snowed really only 2-3 inches, but enough to just render our sleds useless. Mm-hmm. And we had a whiteout for 9 days where we couldn't see 2 meters in front of us. Zero visibility, zero contrast. You can't see the snow under your skis. Zero ceiling in the cloud. Very disorienting and just a debilitating time. And then I had a compass on a lanyard around my waist, and I literally just walked like that for 9 hours following this compass. We wouldn't typically use the compass to navigate, you know. We would use what's called your solar shadow on solar time, or basically solar time simply says, if you set your watch to solar time, and solar time is quite close to your geographic time. So here, Eastern Standard Time, whatever it is, if you check what the solar time is, you'll be 20, 30, 40 minutes off. But really what it is it just divides 360 by 24, giving you 15 degrees. So if you set your watch to solar time, it means at 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun is rising geographic east. So your shadow points geographic west. And every hour, your shadow moves 15 degrees. Yeah. So you know at midday, your shadow points geographic south, if you're in the southern hemisphere. And so historically, that's how guys have followed their shadow. But we saw the sun 15 times in 65 days. So we would have been doing circles if we relied on the sun. Yeah. But we realized And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder if these sneaky guys, these Norwegians that have been mentoring us, if they didn't tell us the secret, or whether they knew we would discover it ourselves. I realized early on that because the wind is so consistent, it cuts the sastrugi the same angle. And so once you work out the angle between the sastrugi and the geographic South Pole, you could just cut that angle with your skis and you were heading where you needed to go. You know? And then when in the whiteout I had the compass, we would align every evening when we got to camp. We would take out, and the reason, people ask, why didn't you use a GPS? Well, back then, there was simply no way we could keep a GPS powered through the day.
Yeah.
Even our solar panel, trying to charge our camera batteries and our sat phone, was on a continual slow degradation because there was so little solar energy. But we would take out a GPS for a minute, quickly get a fix on the geographic South Pole and align our tents more or less. And then in the morning, we knew exactly where to start. So that little error that we might have walked in a day, we would correct in the morning and offset it. And then when we got to 3-4 days from the South Pole, we then took out a GPS, because then you can no longer use a compass, because obviously your compass is pointing to magnetic south, but you're heading for the geographic south. And so all of those conventional ways the accuracy starts degrading as you get close. And then we would take out a GPS in the start and just walk on a line to the geographic South Pole.
Yeah. When you actually get on the South Pole and you lay your compass down, what does it do?
Well, it points to the magnetic South Pole.
I see.
But so if you think of this as the South Pole, the geographic South Pole is the axis of the Earth.
Right.
But the magnetic South Pole lies slightly offset, And so it'll point, and that's the problem is, while initially your compasses, and you can offset that with the declination, and you do, but as you get closer and closer to the South Pole, the offset becomes meaningless because it's now pointing you to a completely different place, and then it's too inaccurate.
Yeah.
But when you're at the South Pole, it's still pointing to the magnetic South Pole if you wanted to go there. But there ain't anything happening at the magnetic South Pole. Ain't no one there,
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. So one of the things, and you touched on a little bit, was this going to the bathroom and getting frostbite. That seems to me like to be how do you, unless you're going to go in the tent, what did you do?
Yeah, so,
it's a crazy question, but.
The reality is you become clockwork, so you couldn't not go unless you were going to force yourself for 2-3 days and become constipated, but that's not good. So typically what you did was you did it early in the morning, like when you're still lying in the sleeping bag, and you literally take 10 seconds. So you go, you got your back downwind, and you try to do it in the lee of the tent. So you're using the tent as a shield, so you're not getting pounded by the wind. You've got a tiny bit of respite there, and obviously we wouldn't do it at the same time,
right?
Because there ain't enough wind-free space. But you literally just, you're going without your ropes and your outer gear. So you literally in your sleeping stuff, and you got your down booties for the camp. You would drop your rods. You would do it. We had permission to dig a hole and leave a number 2, and we had to get permission for that.
Yeah.
Teams that do it supported have to carry all their number 2s out with them.
Yeah.
But you can do the maths of carrying 60 frozen number 2s. It's going to be a problem at some point.
Yeah.
So we had to get permission to leave it. So you quickly do it, you cover it up, and you dive back in the tent, you're in your sleeping bag, and you thaw yourself out. And if you've only taken 10, 15 seconds to do your business, then you'll take a few minutes and you're warm again without the risk. But you never had bare skin, because bare skin has moisture, and moisture instantly freezes, and moisture facilitates that transfer of energy.
Yeah.
So I can tell you 2 occasions you're wearing a set of goggles, like a snowboarding mask, and a face mask. And on 2 occasions, so one time there was just the tiniest of slits between my face mask and my goggles. And at the end of the day, it looked like someone had taken a fine black marker, a Sharpie, and drawn a black line. But it was just a thin strip of frostbite. That piece of skin had frozen from constant pounding. And then another time, I had a tiny hole developing in my mask, my face mask, and the tip of my nose got frostbitten, a little black mark on the tip of my nose. So energy transfer out there is just brutal. I mean, you really don't, we would arrive at the end of the day, and we had about 5 minutes to get the tent up before we would start getting cold,
Could you do it that quick?
Yeah, we could. Yeah. So we kept the tent partially assembled in our in my sled. In other words, it was a tunnel tent, and it had sort of 4 of these poles. And so we would unclip the poles, empty the tent, and collapse that whole thing and lay it lengthwise. And it was always permanently tied to my sled with the sling, because if we lost that tent, game over.
Yeah.
And so then in the evening, we would quickly pull that thing out, and it already would be, all we would need to do is just peg it down and pop those 4 poles in, and the tent was up, and then do the guy ropes quickly, solar panel, dive into the tent, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And the tent works like a greenhouse, the greenhouse effect, if you kind of remember back to sort of primary school science. The sun's radiation comes through as kind of shortwave radiation. It enters the tent fabric, or like the pane of a glass. It reflects off the inside of the tent, and the wavelength changes, but it can now no longer escape the tent. So the thermal energy gets trapped in the tent and builds up like a greenhouse. So most times our tent would actually very quickly become quite warm. In fact, there were occasions when I was always on the sunset side of the tent. Now remember, the sun doesn't really set because it's summer. So it does this in 24 hours. But on solar time, around about 6 in the evening, it does drop a couple of degrees to a slightly lower elevation. It's not noticeable unless you trace the sun. But you can see it if you're taking note. And what that would mean, so I slept on the sunset side, and that's where we had our panel. I would sometimes take my thermometer, and up against the fabric of the tent, I'd have like 30, 60, 90 degrees Fahrenheit against the fabric of the tent. That's how much it had warmed up,
Wow.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
There were 2 or 3 occasions when we climbed in the tent on a really, really overcast day, when it was just so miserably cold, that we took out a stove, fired up our stove in the tent for 2 minutes just to burn off the cold, and then turned it off. But most of the time we could climb in the tent and very quickly take our gloves off, and within sort of half an hour, the thermal energy and our energy would have warmed that tent up, and we had relatively thin sleeping bags. We knew we really wouldn't need huge sleeping bags. Like if you're on a mountain and it's minus 40 on Aconcagua or something, you don't have that dynamic. So you've got to have a warm tent. When it doesn't get dark, you've got that sort of ambient thermal energy that eventually builds up in your tent if it doesn't get dark,
Yeah, amazing. What, looking back on it now, you said this just a minute ago, just the monotony. What was the biggest challenge to you personally?
So that whiteout period, I mean, I had many collapsing ailments. My heel was starting to get unbelievably sensitive. There was some pressure somewhere on my heel that I couldn't pinpoint. And, SMSing home, it seemed like it was some kind of tendonitis, but no one was really sure, and there was nothing I could do about it. I had frostbite on the inside of my leg that I had to start medicating because it was becoming suppurating, and just make sure that didn't become septic. So, but Sevu also had all kinds of, so we had constant things going on that would require maintenance. But in that monotonous period where we didn't see the sun for 9 days, we didn't know it was going to be a whiteout for 9 days. And I remember just my heart being so desperately heavy, and I would pray out every morning, Lord, please just clear this weather. Bring us, oddly enough, in that period, when a front comes through, the wind decreases. The temperature increases slightly and it snows. So now we've got snow, but we've still got overcast conditions, but no wind to blow the snow. And we can't pull the sleds more than 14 kilometers a day because they're just stuck in the sludge. Mm-hmm. And so, and no one could tell us the front is going to last for 9 days, that we wouldn't see the sun for 9 days. And every morning I would start my day and I'd enter kind of a quiet time, and it would be just, Lord, please, change this weather. Please bring us clear weather. Please. I mean, just these pitiful cries every morning up to heaven. And I think eventually, like the angels said, Lord, you got to sort this guy out now. He can't take it anymore. Our ears, all this grumbling. And the Lord stopped me one morning and said, I'm not changing the weather. I brought you here because of the weather, but I can change your heart. And I was cut to my core in that moment. And I just knew that my prayer again had been, down the wrong channel. And two things happened. One, my prayer then shifted, okay, Lord, change my heart. Give me the capacity to deal with the enormity of what you've set out. But I also began to get a revelation of my nature, that my nature had finally been changed in such a way that failure was no longer an option. And that revelation became one of the hardest things to deal with, because I knew now the only way out of this for me is to get to the end. Yeah. Because that's how God's made me. He hasn't made me a person to fail. Yeah. And when you have the revelation that you can't quit simply because it's no longer in you, and that all you can do is to keep going. And suffer and cry, that can be overwhelming, that revelation. And so my prayer was then, okay, then my heart needs to change to be able to grasp that revelation, that you haven't made me to quit. And so there is a way out of this, but it's another 400 miles up the road.
Keep going.
It's another 40 days. Keep going. We just want the shortcut. Like, it's just, there's part of us, I think, that's come from Adam's time, where we like water trickling down a mountainside. We want to find the easiest way to the stream and to the ocean. But that's not the journeys that shape us for generations. It's not the journeys that give us a sense of whose image we're made in and why we carry this responsibility and burden to witness to a world, that we have the ability to do really amazing things, because that's how we've been made. That's whose image we've been made in. And, a lot of people don't get that revelation because maybe you're not physically having to walk another 40 days to get out of it.
Most people don't get that revelation.
But it's almost a sad truth, where you got to sometimes just go and do something where you're required to dig it out, because that's actually how God's made us. Like, He's given us the ability to do just so much more and to endure. But it happens in a timeline where the context, the revelation of our DNA, and yes, I mean, it was still in one sense my choice. I could have said, hey, I'm done. And there was a time in those 9 days when I had a thought, and I didn't have it once. I had it like once an hour, every hour. And the thought was simply, if I just twist my ankle, I can take that satellite phone and I can phone the rescue plane, and I'm done. And we're flying home. And then very quickly in my mind, a scenario's developing where I'm arriving to welcoming crowds and my family and friends, and they're hugging me and loving me and confirming that we never had a chance to do this, that you did great just getting there, well done, you did great. And then I'm standing around a barbecue, drinking a glass of wine, and all of that would take a second. And I realized, okay, I have to just stop that thought, take hold of that thought, remind myself whose image I'm made in, remind myself what I've been told, that this is something I can do and deal with it.
Yeah.
And not 5 minutes later, man, if I just twist my ankle, I'm at the barbecue again.
Yeah.
Stop that thought. Ongoing. Like our flesh constantly reverting to the easy way out and constantly being reminded, someone has done this so your eternity is taken care of. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a quick fix.
Right.
That was a long, terrible process, what Jesus did.
Right.
And so you, in some small way, suck it up and keep going.
Yeah.
Because you can.
Yeah.
But you don't stop having those thoughts. The thoughts still come. They would plague me for 10 hours a day for 9 days,
And Alex, to be fair, you've been in some of the most extreme places in the world.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you're a novice out there. But yet you're still having the thoughts. And I think that's something that people that are listening need to know. It's never that the thoughts are going to totally go away.
Sure.
It's that you learn how to manage those thoughts and how to deal with them. And I think that's one of the things that makes what you do so noteworthy and amazing is that, you have the ability to compartmentalize things, put them to the side, and to stay on task. I remember I have some friends that are Navy SEALs, and one of them was just talking about, I was asking about training and all that stuff. Here's what he said. He says really very simple. All of our training is designed for one thing: to identify whether or not you have quit in you. Because if you have quit in you, we'll find it. You will quit. It's only those guys who don't have quit in them that make it. It has nothing. He said, I've seen guys that weren't even in shape when they got there, but they're SEALs today. Other guys that worked out for 3 years to get there, and the first day they quit. And he said, because it's not your physical body. That's important.
Sure.
But it's your mental capacity. It's your emotional capacity. And that stuck with me. And because, I look back at my own life and I think, people ask me, I've been married for 41 years. I've been in the ministry for 40 years. How did you just stay the course? And it's really just a 2-word answer. Don't quit. Just keep showing up. And I heard someone say one time, said the key to his success was, I just decided I would not quit today. I'd quit tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow never gets here, right?
Sure.
So you just never quit.
Tomorrow he's going to not quit today.
That's right. Don't quit today and quit tomorrow.
Indeed.
And so I think that's to me, the times that I've been with you, the things that I've done that require a little bit of endurance, that's sort of the mantra that takes over your thought life is, I'm just not going to quit. And it seems, and the other backside of the story is that the next day you feel different about it. You feel better about it.
Sure.
You feel like you accomplished something the day before because you didn't quit. And so you're re-upped, ready to go for the next day. And I've heard that in your story over and over and over and over again.
Well, that's the power of that 24-hour dynamic, I mean, I've often wondered, why is a day 24 hours? Why has God made it that way, that the heavens account for a period of time that we describe as 24 hours? And there's so much clarity and evidence that there's a period of renewal, of refreshment, of restarting, of, hey, and Matthew's clear about that, in 6 it talks about, just worry about today.
That's right. Tomorrow has enough trouble of its own.
And what happens at night? You get a renewed sense of that, okay, wake up, right, I've got today. Yeah. You have, because that's how God has designed it. Yeah. To specifically put it out like that.
In endurance athletics, it's like that in your job, in your marriage, in your child raising. Something happens during the night that the next day you feel different about it.
Sure.
Get in a big fight with your wife, the next day you feel different about her. you know, and you can go back and make up and, you know, deal with all that.
Sure.
So you're right. I've thought the very same thing, you know, how important it is.
The sun doesn't set in Antarctica, but you know what? That period of rest and the calendar day, like regardless of where you are, we would rise in the morning, okay. And we would start, you know, one of my tasks was to map out our journey on a timeline in our tent. So I took a Sharpie and I drew a line from the left of the tent right across. I mean, that tent is, you know, it's 8-foot long tent. To the end, the start was 80 degrees, halfway was 85, the end was the South Pole at 90. And every day I would put a little dot and our latitude and our longitude, our position. Our protocol, interestingly, in terms of emergency, was that we would every night have to phone base camp with a satellite phone, relay our coordinates, our latitude and our longitude. And if they had not heard from us within 48 hours, so 2 full days, they would send out the plane to find us to the last known location. And so it was quite important recording that, but typically those little dots were about an inch apart, and it took 40 dots to get halfway. Now, we only had another 20 days of food to do the other half, and the sums of that were pretty overwhelming. I've used up 2/3 of my resource to get 50% of the journey. Another way to say that is I've only got a third left of resource, and I have to do exactly what I've just done, you know, and I feel really lousy and about to die. And so we would sometimes, I mean, I would look up at that timeline, and I've cut that.
I was wondering, where is that today?
I've cut it out, and it's framed, and it's in my house on a wall. And I look at it many times and remind myself that every one of those dots added up to a day of agony, of heartbreak, and the sum total of those dots added up to the journey. And there were days on the expedition when I would look up at that in the evening, I'd put another dot, and I'd think, we're just never going to make it, you know, like how do I put another 20 dots on this thing when we're only halfway? And we would say to each other in that sort of mid-period as we approached the polar plateau, okay, today we're just going to get 1 more inch. That's all we need to think about is the inch to put on the tent. Because the South Pole was still so far out there. There was no visible change in the outside world. The horizon looked the same. Where we'd come from looked the same. Any possible way where we could lose ourselves in this environment looked exactly the same. The only sense of change were those little dots on the inside of our tent. And that became our kind of guiding force. 1 more inch. That's what we're going to get.
What a life lesson. Huh? What a life lesson. Well, finish the trip. You get to the last day of the trip. You broke camp. Your sled is empty, almost.
Almost.
Yeah. And describe the rest of the day.
So we did a documentary soon after that for a TV network, and there's a clip of me on camera in the tent in the evening before, and it says day 64. And I'm talking about being on the eve of our final day. So I know we're about to set out now, and we're about to arrive at the South Pole. And I look 20 years older. You know, I look like a very different person. And I'm absolutely emaciated. And I'm filled with awe and wonder because I'm finding myself in a place that I never thought I would get to, but the Lord constantly reminded me that you will get there because I've made it like that, and nothing you can do can change that. But now finding myself in that place as a weaker, older man, I'm filled with awe and wonder that what He's promised has come about. And so we go to sleep that night, we wake up, and we only had about 15 Ks to do that day. I can't remember, but we were covering about 30 Ks in a day by now. So we snapped it up really quite easily, maybe less than that. And the protocol is relatively strict around the South Pole engagement because it's a scientific base owned by the National Science Foundation, the US. They control the South Pole. Antarctica is not a sovereign piece of land. It's a piece of land that's administered by a treaty And the members of that treaty, there's 16 or 17 of them, are nations that face Antarctica, like Chile, Argentina, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. But the superpowers also have a sliver that they administer. And those nations guide the sort of stewardship of Antarctica. So there's no mining or that kind of exploration allowed. There's very little tourism allowed, and it has to be done in very specific ways. And so most of it is science related. Why the US control the South Pole is related to them being the first to fly to the South Pole. And there's quite a big base there that has about 300 scientists in the summer and a staff of about 40 or 50 in the winter. So we were explained the protocol, and it's very tenuous. You're not allowed to camp anywhere. They send you somewhere. But in front of this base, on the line of longitude that we're approaching, is like a 2-mile VHF antenna that stands about this high, with wires on it. And you're not allowed to go through it. And there are all kinds of stories that it's electric and you're going to get a shock and that you have to go around it. And I remember that morning. It was quite a gloomy morning, and we see the base getting closer and closer, and we've kind of forgotten about the VHF antenna. And all of a sudden, there it is. We're like, oh, gosh. And then now we look down. Like a mile down there's the end of this stupid thing. Now, we've walked 600 miles. You think, well, what's another 2 miles? Another 2 miles is 2 miles more than we're prepared to do at this point because we walked 600 miles. So we stand there for about 10 minutes and no one really wants to touch it. And we're trying to work out, is this thing going to give us a shock or isn't it? And oh my gosh, because you can see you can sneak under the thing. And we eventually decide discretion is really the better way to go, So we grit and we walk 1 mile down around the stupid thing and 1 mile back. And we were on solar time, but we had left Chile, and so we were more or less on the same timeline as Chile. But the base was on New Zealand time because that sliver points to New Zealand, and the US fly in via a New Zealand base to get there. So while it was about 2 p.m. on our time, it was about 1 a.m. in the morning for the base. So everyone was asleep. But there was a team. A team is assigned to greet and welcome you on your arrival at the South Pole. Because it's not every day that 2 idiots rock up on skis, from somewhere, and they're still alive. And they don't have to go and rescue them because that's historically what they've typically had to do. So they're very reticent to the whole idea. But as we approach kind of this substantial building, there are these 2 folk that have come out and they welcome to the South Pole. And we're just so thrilled to be there. And they give you a quick sort of 2-minute, this is what you can and what you cannot do. The base, interestingly, is not allowed to feed you, but one of them will take you on a tour. You have to put your stuff in a specific place. If you're going to spend the night there and you've run out of food, which has happened, the logistics company that facilitates the flight in and out have a food emergency stash buried there, So we go and stash our stuff. We then go and obviously walk to the geographic South Pole, which is just next to the base. And, it's kind of like a small little nondescript pole with a funny medallion on it and a sign that has the quote by Scott and Amundsen. And that point moves every year because the axis of the Earth is at a slight angle, and that angle creates a wobble. And that wobble creates what's called a precession of the axis. It describes a very slight circle. And so it means that every year the actual location of the geographic South Pole changes. And the winter staff in the South Pole, their task is to map out where the new South Pole is, and they do a annual badge, kind of like those summit things, and then they attach it to this thing. So I remember one of our mentors was a British explorer, and he said, listen, when you get to the South Pole, to make sure you've got there, just walk in a 12-meter circle around it. I think he was having us. But anyway, so we took the photos there, and then we went about maybe 100 yards away is what's called the ceremonial pole. That's the famous barber's pole that's surrounded by the flags of the participating nations of the Antarctic Treaty with the silver. That's where really everyone takes their photo.
Yeah.
But they're in two separate places. And once we had done that, we then went to, we'd obviously unclipped, and we went to the base and up this flight of stairs. I'll tell you an interesting story. As I'm climbing this flight of stairs, 2 stories up, within 2 seconds, my legs start screaming with that lactic acid burn. Because for 60 days, all I've done is this.
Yeah.
And now I'm climbing vertically upstairs. It was the strangest sensation. It was fatiguing climbing up this.
Your muscles had atrophied. You had no strength.
Completely.
Wow.
We get up, we go inside. We're in sort of a airport arrival departure lounge that has the schedule of that fancy C-130 that flies in on skis. There were these bowls of biscuits. We weren't allowed to be fed, but let me tell you, we smashed those cookies in about 2 minutes, had a coffee, and then they took us on a quick tour. They showed us what's going on in the base. Very interesting. Yeah. And as it turned out, the plan was really then to wait a day, and I probably would have preferred that. And then they send that plane to come pick you up, which is a 6-hour flight in and 6 hours back. Yeah. And as it turned out, there was an engineer in the air sorting out some snowcat problem. And they said, hey, there's a plane coming for you in the next 3 hours, because it's very economically driven. They say to get 1 barrel of fuel to the geographic South Pole, they have to burn 9 barrels. So the fuel costs compounds the closer you get to the South Pole. So the fact that they had a plane in the air meant this thing's coming to pick you up. It was going to save them a chunk of money. We won't get a refund or anything, but it meant 3 hours later, this tiny plane landed, we climbed on board, and now we were flying back. And we flew back on the same line. And I remember the plane warms up really quickly, and now you're starting to thaw. So your hands and your feet are starting to scream in pain, because while they haven't been frostbitten, they've been frost-nipped multiple times. So all of that thermal energy has done cellular damage, not deep, but very superficial. And now as it's thawing out, you're just in pain. And I'll never forget discovering a part of my character that I didn't know existed until that 6-hour flight. Within about 15, 20 minutes of that plane, I found myself with my face glued to the window, and I was staring down at the ice looking for something. And I'm sure you can think what I was looking for, because I asked this question, when I do a South Pole talk, and there's always someone who knows what I was looking for, a sign of my tracks. Yeah. We flew exactly over the same line, and there was a period for a few minutes where we flew over this massive crevasse field, and I knew we'd punched a hole around that one side, and I'm trying to see where we'd put our tent, where was the pile of snow. I'm trying to see a cut in the ice. When we passed Thiel, we had to land at Thiel Mountains to refuel after 3 hours. And I couldn't see any sign of us, and it drove me bonkers in those 6 hours. And I began to realize, it was the start of this kind of, it wasn't an instant revelation, but it was the start of a real truth that the Lord was kind of revealing to me, that we are made for significance. Like in our DNA is this deep desire to make our lives count, to do something. And I suspect it's because His Son gave it all for eternity to count. And so in our DNA is this real responsibility that most of us aren't aware of, that we want our lives to count for something. We want to leave something behind that shows we've furthered the kingdom. We've nudged someone in the right direction. We've changed this place and left it for our kids for the better than we inherited it. And so I'm staring out there, searching for some sign that I've done what I think we've done. I feel when I pinch my waist, I can feel I've lost 40 pounds. I'm thin. And my hands and my feet are screaming, but I cannot see any sign of us. We are like the tiniest dust mote insect on the buttocks of a giant hippopotamus.
Yeah.
That was our passing over Antarctica. It had covered up any sign of us. And that frustrated me because I wanted evidence that we had done what we'd just done.
Yeah.
And as I got to the end of that flight, I began to realize that not only, I wrote some stuff in my diary in that last hour in the plane. There was a physical change in my body, but it wasn't me that had left a mark on the land. It was the land that had left a mark on me, It had pushed and twisted and pulled and reshaped. And it was that impression that is the journey of sharing and witnessing. And my life is no different to anyone else's life. We all walk our journey. We all have our failures. We go through our trials. We are pushed and pressed on by life, by stressors, by things that happen.
That's right.
But it's that journey and the learning that gives our life flavor and a unique voice and a unique witness to be able to share stories and say, you know what, I was in a similar place and I this is how I got to. This is what I did. This is what the Lord shared. And so I came out of that icy wilderness realizing, man, I hate the cold, but I found a newfound respect and revelation for the responsibility of each of us to live out our calling and our potential. And why it's so important that we do hard things, because we got to be pressed on by the world in a unique way, because that's our unique voice, And so, you heard me joke when I was sharing about the desert. I never wanted to go to the cold again. And if you ask me, would I ever do that, South Pole again? It's a fat, emphatic no.
No, not again.
No ways.
Done.
I've been back to Vincent a couple of times, and I've embraced the wonder that is just tasting the sort of the kind of appetizers of Antarctica, as it were. But the idea of selfishly putting myself in that prison and knowing I've got that long journey before I'm free again. I don't. And back to so one revelation I had around that cold, desperate, gloomy time when the Lord told me, "Hey, I brought you here because of the circumstance, but I can change your heart." I realized that I won't be able to come and do this again. If I pull the plug now, if I twist my ankle, and I get on that plane and I'm out of here, and I'm justified in failing and how far we had gone.
Yeah.
I would not be able to wake up in a year or 2 or 3 years and try and do this again. So profound had been the revelation of how arduous this was that I knew I didn't have it in me to try again.
Mm-hmm.
This was my time.
Wow.
So suck it up and stick it out.
Yeah.
And I had a similar thought in, Freedom Challenge when I was chasing sub 10 in the record, down in that last, it's a race like the Tour Divide. When you're so far into something, it's like an investment that compounds over time. That's the last place you want to quit.
Yeah.
Because to get back to that place,
it's too hard.
It's too hard. You might never have the energy, the timing,
Yeah.
You've put in all of that energy. Just suck it up.
Yeah.
See it through.
Keep going. Don't
Keep
quit
going.
today.
Don't quit today.
Yeah.
Do it tomorrow.
Wait till tomorrow.
And eventually the tomorrow will be the South Pole or whatever it is.
Alex, it's been amazing. I mean, I've heard your story multiple times, and every time I get something fresh out of it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Absolutely.
There's somebody out there listening to us right now that you're ready to quit. You just got it in your mind that you can't go another day, you can't go another moment. Maybe you're ready to quit on your marriage. Maybe you're ready to quit on your life. Maybe you're ready to quit on your family. And Alex, I'd like for you just to pray for those people. You have the ability to stick it out. And maybe that this moment is for them, that that they gained encouragement to stay in the race. Would you pray for us?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Lord, we lift up those folk. You know them. You see their hearts. You see their challenges. You see their circumstances. I pray that you give them a revelation of whose DNA they're made in, Lord, that you have given them the ability deep down to persevere, to continue. We pray supernatural grit, Lord, and a revelation of who you are, and that through you, all of these things are possible. No matter how desperate the situation is, through you, it's possible. In the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.